Darren Mell is president of Voice of the Voiceless and a licensed pastor serving Agape First Ministries. As a former gay Christian, Darren intimately understands the dramatic and nuanced difference between the God and faith he professed and the all-powerful God and authentic church he now serves and enjoys. Darren is the leading voice on current issues, taking the church by storm, and clearly focuses the church in the spiritually profitable direction. His work across various fields and expertise in security and risk make him any leader's go-to resource on precise Christian response to historical and current trends. Let's welcome Darren Mell.
Let me be the first to welcome you to Voice of the Voiceless. My name is Darren Mell and I am the president. Voice of the Voiceless is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that amplifies the voices of ex-LGBT and helps seekers in reconciling faith, behaviors, and identity. If you are looking for someone to defend the rights of former homosexuals, individuals with unwanted same-sex attraction, and their families, we are your go-to resource. We also support the faith-based community and work actively in the United States and abroad, defending the rights of individuals to share their views of faith and homosexuality publicly. I pray you will join with us as we speak the truth to the nations.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Voice of the Voiceless podcast. My name is Darren Mell, and the president of Voice of the Voiceless. And today, joining me is Andrew Rodriguez, a board member of Voice of the Voiceless, as well as a licensed counselor and the creator of Psycho Bible. And we're going to be speaking of a court case that Arthur Goldberg was involved in. So we have Arthur Goldberg here with us today. And
hello, Arthur.
Hello, Arthur.
Hi there, guys.
And so just a technical note for everybody, Arthur's camera is frozen, and we're going to go forward with his picture, but we do have him on audio. So take what we can get. So today we're going to talk about a court case, because right now a thing that's in the news with Biden passing his executive order for LGBTQ just last week, and he had a lot of talk about conversion therapy and Voice of the Voiceless, the shirt that I'm wearing, Changed Movement, and many other organizations have been labeled as conversion therapists. So Voice of the Voiceless is a Christian organization. I'm a licensed minister with Agape First Ministries. The Change Movement, founded by Ken and Elizabeth of Bethel Church. They started the Change Movement in 2018 when California was going to pass a conversion therapy ban that included consumer fraud language. Now, where did that consumer fraud language come from, and where did the idea come from? Well, we have the JONAH case, which set precedent, and we're talking about this from a historical standpoint and how we've arrived at where we're at. So setting precedent that seeking sexual orientation change efforts and claiming that that is even possible has been labeled fraud. And so in California, they tried to do that. Even here, a couple months ago in Minnesota, they tried to pass a conversion therapy ban, which included consumer fraud language. And effectively, and I'm making my case with this presentation here, and what you'll see is that claiming that change is possible is considered consumer fraud. And that they're using this as a bully pulpit, the courts, and using this claim as bullying our community of people who have seeking transformation, seeking change, or have been changed and been restored. That bully pulpit has been used against us. So Arthur, I brought him on to speak of the history of what has happened in the past so that you, my viewers, will understand. And so why are we having this conversation? I feel like people are calling us conspiracy theorists because we're claiming that nobody's going through this electric shock therapy. And predominantly, they bait and switch, and they use a Mott and Bailey kind of move by using conversion therapy defined as electroshock therapy in one context, and then in another just talk therapy and pastoral care and spiritual seeking spiritual counsel. They'll bait and switch and stuff. And so we're the conspiracy theorists saying, no, the horrible stuff that they're doing, we're against it as well, or that they quote saying are doing, it's really from the past. We're not doing electroshock therapy, but it's not happening. Here in Minnesota, for example, when they tried to pass ours, I went to all the licensing boards and I said, where's people doing conversion therapy? And they said, no, nobody's done conversion therapy to that sense. And so there's no evidence of this. And one of the things that I'm concerned about is that when they come against religious practice, against talk therapy, that having only one side to mental health, one direction, that you have to go gay, is going to make you really jaded, because you're going to internalize something that you know isn't you, and you're just going to accept it. It's going to make you jaded. You're going to feel trapped, that you only got this one way. You have to go gay, and that's it. If you question your sexuality and experiment with homosexuality and decide you don't want to do that and you want to go back, but you're addicted to gay porn, well, too bad. You don't get therapy for that, because that would reduce your same-sex attraction, and that's quote-unquote sexual orientation change effort and conversion therapy. If you want to go to your pastor and say, I'm repentant of being addicted to gay porn, which is where I was, well, he can't help you get over your addiction. You're just called to be that way. At least that's what these bans equate to. It's chilling the speech of pastors. And so when people are struggling with suicidality in the change movement, you'll hear people talking about, well, I was suicidal because I didn't want to be gay, and I had conviction that I wasn't, but I was abused and sexualized as a child, and I want help with that. And because they're suicidal, well, they can't get that help. And they're testifying, this talk therapy helped me. And in JONAH, they were allowed to have testimonies of individuals, but they weren't allowed to have expert witnesses. So we'll talk about that in a bit. So let's just talk about JONAH. JONAH was a Jewish ministry. And Arthur, if you could explain what the mission was at the time for JONAH. You're the purveyor of it, right?
JONAH is a Jewish ministry that, consistent with our religious principles, serve men of all faiths or no faith. And we did not proselytize anybody. We dealt with people who had unwanted same-sex attractions and provided them with educational outreach services, including counseling referrals and other types of resources, books that were relevant to understand the issues better, to various types of support groups also, like weekend programs. We worked closely with something called, what's now called Brothers Road, and they ran, 100 some odd weekends over the course of years and years. And the best news I can give is the fact that we had literally innumerable people, hundreds and hundreds of people who successfully changed. I just recently got an email from somebody who was one of our people, who said that he was so grateful for the fact that he's now married, has 2 kids, and it would never have happened if it wasn't for the programs that we offered and the resources that we gave to him, including potential therapists and all that kind of thing.
Yeah. And I'll point out that JONAH doesn't exist anymore because of this lawsuit that we're going to be talking about, and we'll talk through many parts of this. And so Arthur isn't in this ministry anymore. And we'll talk. There is no such ministry.
There is no such ministry anymore.
There's no such ministry as that in New Jersey. And so
correct. There are lots of other ministries out there that help people dealing with unwanted same-sex attractions in every state in the union, except probably New Jersey.
But it's interesting, though. A lot of the ministries that are out there are specifically Christian. And JONAH really was unique in that it was something, although you're saying it was for anyone of all faiths, it was something that was unique, that it was presented to the Jewish community. And I don't think there's been anything that has replaced that niche yet.
That is correct. That is absolutely correct. And in fact, while we believe that God, of whichever faith one believes in, is a fundamental underlying basis of why someone has unwanted same-sex attractions, that belief in God is helpful, that the issues that they deal with are more psychological, which is why we can help people with all faith or no faith.
Yep.
So a bit of irony here that in their quest to be equitable and fighting for diversity and all of that, they end up marginalizing a community that has already has a history of persecution and marginalization. So
correct. In
just
fact,
saying.
We were just saying, and you're right. And we were, as far as I know, the only Jewish-based institution doing that. And we worked internationally. We were all over the world.
All right. So let's talk about this lawsuit. So they recognize JONAH as a nonprofit organization dedicated to educating the Jewish community about the social, cultural, and emotional factors that lead to same-sex attractions. And JONAH's business practices, they claim, violated New Jersey Consumer Fraud Act by misrepresenting that homosexuality is a mental illness or disorder, and that JONAH's therapy program is changing the sexual orientation of clients. And so in the lawsuit, according to the complaint, JONAH provided conversion therapy. So they're labeling what you do in their language. I'll notice that, or what JONAH was doing rather. They labeled it conversion therapy.
Right, which is, I think, a terrible name. I much prefer either SOCHI, sexual orientation change efforts, gender affirming therapy, etc. There's several names for it.
Yeah, and
therapy, whatever.
And there's safety, as well.
Right. So gender affirming therapy, now that's been co-opted by the trans activists. So that's not very tenable either anymore.
Yep. So they're labeling it, and they're saying that you're providing counseling services purporting to change plaintiff's sexual orientation from homosexual to heterosexual. JONAH believes that homosexuality is a quote-unquote learned behavior that can reduce or eliminate through psychological and spiritual help. And so then they go on and list a bunch of that. And so in listing out a bunch of the things that they experience, they take the therapy process out of context and then reframe it in their lack of belief in the process, and really try to make it a wacky, wild-eyed kind of thing, rather than a point in space trying to meet an objective. And so they labeled all of that as conversion therapy. And when you watch their videos about the lawsuit and watch the plaintiffs explain things, they take things out of the context of therapy and then try to make it, oh, this is crazy. And so that's part of all these different methods. But they leave out, reflecting on your spiritual beliefs and practical things that do actually help it, and those other things could help as well. And I know somebody very close to me that has had things experience sexual orientation change through being exposed to the showers in the gym, and just not and getting over the fear of their body and practicing that. Now that's not part of our repertoire, nor do we do it, but it's fact that when people are so ashamed in their body, to just go out and be yourself in public and get over that fear could be healing. And that was
that's referred to in the literature as body image wounds.
Body image wounds. Yep. And I was body shamed in the gym class. And so I'd never experienced that therapy model, but I could see how I was terrified to be in the showers with boys in high school because I was shamed so bad. Anyways, moving on. So the fraud claims is that it was an unconscionable commercial practice, deceptive, and fraud, that claiming that homosexuality is a mental disorder, which that's them putting words into your mouth.
We never said it was a mental disorder, ever.
Yeah, and nobody in my circles that I'm aware of call it a mental disorder.
That's language that comes out of the DSM of many years ago, when it was classified as a mental disorder, which is the DSM is the American Psychiatric Association's official Bible of mental is.
And we'll be talking about that soon. And so we'll talk about that. And so they're saying that Jonah was calling it a mental disorder in face of empirical evidence to the contrary, that same-sex attractions could be reduced or eliminated through therapy. So they're explaining in their terms how they understand it, and they're trying to get the courts to agree. And so they're saying that that Jonah was misrepresenting the truth by saying that homosexuality is a mental illness or disorder, that Jonah could cure or treat that disorder, that Jonah could do so within some specified time period, such as 2 or 3 years. Now,
I don't think that was really. I know it's not accurate. We never represented. They may have represented that we represented it, but we never represented that.
Right, and I'll point out Stephen Black and his Freedom Realized book, where he went through 30 years of client files and did a retrospective from the clients, and they had over 500 people respond, and 70% of the respondents experienced change in orientation if they spent 1 year dedicated to the program. And so, just in that sense, Stephen could be labeled as doing conversion therapy and sued under consumer fraud, for example, by saying that if you stayed in the program, but that's his evidence. He did a scientific research, and it showed that 1 year, 70% of the people experienced change. So that's just self-reflecting. So 4, Jonah's program specific success rate, sometimes 1/3 and other times 2/3 or 70. Well, Stephen's own empirical research to his 30 years showed 70%. So actually, in hindsight, 10 years later, the numbers actually match. Number 5, Jonah's program theories and techniques were scientifically based and valid. Now we're going to talk about that, about scientific evidence and scientific experts, and we'll get to that. So they're making a claim that they're not going to allow Jonah to even defend. 6, Jonah's program was capable of changing people from homosexual to heterosexual. And 7, Jonah used unconscionable business practices. And so, and I'm just giving some background. The plaintiffs made it clear that they did not intend. So the plaintiffs in this lawsuit, this is hysterical to me. They're saying, we're trying to make it clear that we don't intend to prove the sexual orientation change efforts in general can't be effective. Rather, just the universe, they want to stick to Jonah's program rather than the universe of all sexual orientation change efforts. Except that's a complete and utter lie, because they've done this in all the other states. The LGBT lobby uses this as a threat. They use this as justification to shut down anything in any other state, including Minnesota and California. That's how the change movement started.
When I was in graduate school and I was being sacked because I helped counsel men who are leaving homosexuality and working through or coping with their unwanted same-sex attraction, the heads of my counseling program cited the Jonah case. They said, but aren't you aware it's proven to be consumer fraud to even do this type of counseling? So yes, it's the way it's being used. Whether that was their intent or not, which we all know really what their intent was, because otherwise they would just go after the individual therapist, not Jonah as a whole practice or a whole referral service. And
I need to point out to our viewers that Jonah themselves weren't doing any therapy or counseling.
Yeah.
So
they wanted to cut off all possibility for you making new referrals to other places that might not be doing the forms of counseling that they disapproved of, because they didn't want any form of help being offered.
Yeah,
that's the ultimate intention.
The way I saw the intention was that they went after Jonah, who is the religious aspect, referring people to the psychological aspect. And we have a video that we share often from one of the speaking heads of the LGBT lobby, Sam Brinton, when he was at Google headquarters in 2014. And they said, well, why are you going after just the psychologists and not the religious? He says, well, we're going after the psychologists because they're licensed. But by doing that, we're culturally changing it so that he can't go after the pastors and the ministers and the camps and that kind of stuff, but he can make it culturally unacceptable to do it. So they know that if they can get the culture to change in the court, in my point of this video, is the courts to agree with them, then they've done the work against the religion, and they've set the precedent. They're actually changing the freedom of religion. Arthur doesn't get to have the Noahide laws lifted up and help people to live according to those, you know.
Yeah, one of the most egregious things is actually that they did in the case was bring the suit under the consumer fraud statute, which consumer fraud is generally designed to assist people who had been fraudulently purchased something, whether it be a used car, a refrigerator, whatever. And in particular, because neither my co-director Elaine Burke nor I ever took any compensation from JONAH, we basically, one of our defenses was, hey, Judge, this doesn't apply to us because we're a nonprofit corporation. And we didn't charge fees, and they didn't, and neither did any of the people in the organization make fees. Nevertheless, judges kind of washed that away. It's the first case that ever held that the consumer fraud statute applies to not-for-profit corporations.
And that's a great point, because that really should be something that churches should pay attention to, because so many churches, I think, and Christians in general, have just been looking at the therapy bans, and they've been thinking, no, that only affects licensed therapists. It's not going to affect us. But when you look at, say, the JONAH case, you realize, oh, wait, that can apply to us just as well, for sure.
Correct.
Yes, and in this, I've testified in several places, and in Bloomington, Minnesota, for example, they were adamant that, you know, these conversion therapy ban in the city won't impact religious practice. And I'm like, no, it will. Yeah. And with Minnesota, the Minnesota bill, I got my representative to admit on the record that he knew that it would repress religious speech, but he didn't care. He knew it. He knew that it was a First Amendment violation, and he said, I don't care. And I got it on video.
And also, look at AB 2943, which almost passed in 2018. That started the whole change movement in California. They were saying any form of help, if funds were being exchanged, would be illegal. But in the JONAH case, funds weren't being exchanged for JONAH services. So I highly doubt churches that were offering free seminars or free counseling for people who struggle with unwanted same-sex attraction or gender confusion would have been safe if AB 2943 had passed in California.
Well, and to that point, Andrew, I was there with the lawyers that were explaining this to the churches, and they were saying, look, if you take tithes and offerings for pastoral care, that is an exchange of money, and that will come under
that was a thing I was thinking as well at the time. Yep.
Yeah, and so it does impact religious freedom. What they're doing is they're carving out the LGBT community, and they're saying you cannot evangelize or proselytize or disciple this community because that's consumer fraud.
Yep.
And so here, to the segue of harm, is they're saying, well, what JONAH was promising and what JONAH offers led to depression, suffering, unimpaired ability to engage in physical and emotional relationships with men, suicidal thoughts, anxiety, and then they sought to get their money back, which was for the therapist, not to JONAH, but and the programs, you know, to go participate in a group event. And so they claim that they had to go through reparative therapy. So they're relabeling reparative therapy to being undo what JONAH had done. And they wanted their money back for that therapy as well.
Yeah, one thing I'd like to add on. You used the word promise, that we promised something. The truth of the matter is that every client who walked in the door, before we referred them out to a therapist, signed a written document, and the plaintiffs in this case had the written documents that said no representations have been made as to the validity, blah blah blah. It was kind of standard legal language, and that was of course totally ignored by the court.
Yeah, and it just got me thinking, Arthur, is they're really putting talk therapy on trial, though they're not intending to do that. They have done that, because if you were to look at marriage and the stigma of marriage, because the APA now has a whole section dedicated to polygamy and denormalizing monogamy, monogamy normative, if you will. And so if someone goes to marriage therapy and they say, oh, well, you said that you keep our marriage together, but it didn't. And so now I'm suing you because I got divorced, and I mean, it's the same argument or the same mechanism by which to go after marriage therapists. And they say, well, science is settled. Polygamy, is the natural thing of humanity, and I was cheating on my spouse and you tried to help me, but it didn't. And now the science is, I mean, we're going down that same route.
Oh yeah.
The whole politically correct culture and woke culture is just unbelievable. They're trying to change all the traditional moral values upon which this society is based. And a free society cannot really fully exist without having the basic moral values given to us by God Almighty.
Yeah, and so we're moving into licentiousness, which is no moral or material boundaries. That's what the LGBT division, what is it, division 44?
I think it's 40 something, 42 or 43.
42 or 44, division 44.
I think it's 44.
44,
Okay.
yeah, division 44 of the APA, where all human sexuality goes through the LGBT lens. And now they've got the polygamy stuff going. Yeah, it's licentiousness, no moral boundaries. But we'll get to that. I want to save that because we are actually going to talk about that. So here's the crux that I really want to focus on. We're already 30 minutes in. Oh my goodness. So this is going to be a two-parter. I really feel it coming. So the courts didn't allow JONAH expert witnesses. They did have witnesses as to, people that had experienced change. They got to come in, but the expert witnesses talking to the effectiveness of it and the methods and et cetera, they weren't allowed in. And I really want to deconstruct or expose the thoughts behind this. So the plaintiffs moved to bar the testimony of 6 experts. So it was the MDs, LCPCs, PhDs, those, and a rabbi. Okay, so I'm going to go through and we'll talk about each one of these and how. And so they use the argument that New Jersey requires for evidence when you have an expert. It says if scientific, technical, or other specialized knowledge will assist the trier of the fact understanding the evidence or determine the fact of an issue, a witness qualified as an expert by knowledge, skill, experience, training, education. So those are all things that we're saying those 6 people had, may testify thereto in the form of opinion or otherwise. And then 703, the facts or data in a particular case upon which an expert bases an opinion or inference may be those perceived by or made known to the expert at or before the proceeding. If of a type reasonably relied upon by experts in a particular field informing opinions or inferences upon the subject, the facts or data need not be admissible in evidence. And so what these two together are going to get us is the plaintiffs bring their experts, which is the APA. They're saying, well, I don't want to get ahead of myself. So JONAH wanted to bring in Dr. Berger. He's a psychiatrist currently working in private practice. He was a professor of psychiatry.
He actually is now retired and living in Israel. But
yeah.
At the time, he was currently working.
Yeah, this is at the time of the lawsuit, what year did it start?
The lawsuit started in 2012.
2012. Okay, and it took several years to finish.
And then we've had a course, which I'm sure you'll get to, is the subsequent case. So it's been 10 years.
And there's a second
10 years of litigation.
Yep, 10 years running. So, but I want to talk to the credentials, okay? Because 702, is he credentialed? So he was a past president of the Ontario branch of the APA. So APA, of course, is American. Ontario, not American, but
he was an American also.
Yeah, he was an American, but he was the president of the branch of the APA. So he is an expert. He has written articles on subjects, including discussing psychotherapeutic treatment of the male homosexual. He's published in the Journal of Psychotherapy and in NARTH Annual Conference. So he's credentialed. So if we go back to 702, he has the knowledge, skill, experience, training, and education. Okay? I'm only going to do that once. Christopher Doyle. Now, I got to say, Christopher Doyle is a personal friend. He was the founder of Voice of the Voiceless, of which I am the president now and is hosting this podcast. And he wrote the book, and it's a thick one. The War on Psychotherapy, When Sexual Politics, Gender Ideology, and Mental Health Collide. And so the ideology is something that we're going to be talking about here. So he himself is a former homosexual. He was married at the time. He had kids. And so this is somebody that has lived experience, has expertise, Joseph Nicolosi. Now, Joseph Nicolosi, of course, if you don't know, is the grandfather, is the LGBT lobby would say, is the grandfather of conversion therapy. He created conversion therapy or reparative therapy. And he's a licensed psychotherapist. He was never kicked out of the APA. He was always a licensed psychotherapist in California. He never lost his license. He founded the Thomas Aquinas Psychological Clinic. He's passed away, but his son, Joseph Nicolosi Jr., carries on therapy in this sense. And he was the founding member and former president of NARTH. And they framed NARTH, which it was the National Association for Research and Therapy of the Homosexuality. They're trying to dismiss it as saying that it has less than 1,000 members, and it included non-mental health professionals such as counselors, teachers, and pastors.
Yeah, that's pretty wild. So including counselors as non-mental health professionals, that's quite a stretch.
Yeah, licensed counselors are mental health professionals. So
maybe there's some lay counselors, but or counselors in training,
yep,
who have their masters, but they're not yet licensed. They still are mental health professionals.
And there's biblical counselors too. So, and I would assume.
But I would say, being a member of the Alliance, which is now, as of 2014, NARTH changed its name to the Alliance for Therapeutic Choice and Scientific Integrity, and I'm a member of it. And I would say, in general, majority of the members are licensed clinicians. So very few are pastors or teachers. That's a super minority.
So there is Dr. Phelan was a licensed clinical social worker, and so he had expertise. Dr. Diggs, now he received his medical degree from the State University of New York in biomedical sciences. He wrote a book, he authored the article titled "The Health Risks of Gay Sex," and he had a curriculum. So he has expertise. And then, of course, we have Rabbi Sulberger and Arthur, being that Jonah was a Jewish ministry. Tell us the relationship.
Well,
with
Rabbi Stuhlberg was one of our advisors. He also, frankly, recommended. He lives in California still, and he'd recommend. A lot of people would go to him because he was a well-known principal of a religious school called a yeshiva, and he would both recommend people to us. But his function was to talk about what the Jewish religious law was all about in terms of trying to help people who were struggling with unwanted homosexual ideation.
And it's important to know that the rabbi, a religious leader, is denied as an expert witness to talk about the religious aspects.
Correct.
Of homosexuality and change. So we're going to cover some dismissal reasons. I put this as A1. It is a scientific fact that homosexuality is not a disorder, but rather is a normal variation of human sexuality. And thus, any expert opinion concluding that homosexuality is a disorder is inadmissible. Okay? And then they quote the APA and the DSM.
Could I just interject real quick with that one?
Yep.
So this, as we're going to see, their whole premise is based off this statement right here, that it is a scientific fact that homosexuality is not a disorder, blah, blah, blah. Everything else is based off that premise. This was a line that was quoted to me when I was going through discrimination in graduate school, that you can't treat homosexuality because it's been scientifically proven to not be a disorder, and that it's a normal variation of human sexuality. Normal variation of human sexuality. That is not a scientific fact. You can't scientifically prove that. Not to mention, if you did try, you would come up short, because at least statistically speaking, it's a philosophical assertion.
Yes.
So to use the term "it's scientific" is completely inappropriate. You could say that what they're doing is they're privileging one philosophical worldview over any other. So,
and we
right
do
there at the outset, you can
Beyond
know.
that, don't they also claim that people are born that way? There's such a thing as a gay gene, and
Yeah, there's no scientific fact for those
You'd be
things.
better than I at giving the information that there's no such thing as a gay gene. It's never been proven, ever, never, ever been proven. And what is so stupid about this particular opinion, which Darren has highlighted, is that the court said that it's not here; it's in the next place, I guess. That that anyone who believes in
don't steal the thunder, Arthur.
don't steal the thunder. Okay,
We got it.
That normal variation language is a moral assertion. So they're making a moral claim at the outset, and they're basing everything off their ethics, their ideology.
Talking about that as well. And
all
so,
right.
Yeah, we're getting ahead of ourselves.
Sorry, get passionate. It's
the passion, and we know the punchline because we've lived it. So plaintiffs contend that each of all the people that they're dismissing as doctors are based on the initial false premise that homosexuality is not a normal variant, that homosexuality is not normal variant, that homosexuality is not a normal variant. Dismissal reason A2. They assert that because the belief in homosexuality is not a mental disorder is false and lacks any basis in science. Any expert opinion is also false. And then they go on to explain everybody's arguments. Well, you don't believe that homosexuality, or you don't agree that it's normal, so we're going to dismiss you and you and you and you. And so because there were depositions and all their statements were made known to the plaintiffs, they said, well, you have opinions that are questioning our credibility. Well, you can't do that because we're gay, and we say we're gay. Lack of actual expertise in the area, and I put approved beliefs, results in unacceptable methods. So anything that you do, they're saying anything that you do to affect sexual orientation change effort is based on scientific fallacies. Therefore, any of your expertise is wrong, and so your methods are wrong. So they're just de facto saying you can't testify the credibility of gay people in general. You can't. They literally said it. These are the quotes. You cannot testify as to credibility of gay people in general. I lived in the gay community, so I know the culture, the beliefs, and the values, and the belief system. And so I can actually testify as to credibility of that because I've changed. And so as some of these, actually one of the experts, Christopher Doyle, for example, had himself experienced change. Relying on studies but not assessing their validity. And this is a common tactic. They say, well, you're relying on studies, but you aren't looking at the validity of that study. And they dismiss retrospective. Part of the APA and the 2009 therapeutic approaches to sexual orientation change efforts, they dismissed a bunch of our research. And you'll see on Voice of the Voiceless, if you go on our page, we have the APA deception, and we have a whole report of all the science that they deny and say, oh, well, that's not valid. That's not valid. That's not valid. They have all these cherry picking reasons why it's not, but then they don't hold that to their own research.
You're also dealing with something that's very common today of identity politics. I mean, what they're saying is because we identify as gays, as the gay activists, therefore your premise is wrong. And there are people who don't identify as gay, who have same-sex attraction feelings and underlying issues, but their identity is dismissed as not relevant.
Yes. And so any opinions regarding how effective sexual orientation change efforts are is inapplicable to the scientific practices at issue, and they should be excluded. So they're just saying you can't have a differing opinion, but I kind of get ahead of myself. So then they go on to create another dismissal reason. Plaintiffs do not argue that the opinions by JONAH's experts are necessarily false. I want to point that out. The plaintiffs aren't saying that the opinions of JONAH experts aren't necessarily false, but rather they argue that because these secondary premises are derived from the rest entirely or on the false premise that homosexuality is a disorder, their testimony is nothing more than an inadmissible opinion. And so they say, well, we don't necessarily disagree with some of the secondary arguments, but we're not going to let even you have secondary arguments as experts because those are inadmissible as well. A1, right? When we go back to A1. So they wrap everything else up saying, no, you disagree that it's part of normal variation, so we're just going to dismiss it all right. And then they keep going. I mean, they really put the crux of it at the beginning, and then they go and they nitpick everything else. And here they say the dismissal of A4. But Dr. Diggs' opinions are not beyond the average juror. And so the jurors don't need expert explanation that sexual activity in any form is potentially harmful. They did not want the harm of sodomy to be known on the record. No, I'm sorry, I've lived it. It is not known. I did not know what the harms would be, other than, oh, you might get a disease. No, that's not it. And what those diseases can lead to. And putting the fear of sodomy into people could definitely help people experience sexual orientation change effort to give up. You know what? That's disgusting. It's harmful. I don't even want to talk about the nastiness of it. And they just lose taste for it. That could be a leading thing that leads somebody out of sexual or out of gay orientation. Like, it very well could be, but they don't even want to talk about that. Sorry, any thoughts to that, or should I just go on?
Go on.
Yeah, let's go.
We'll go on. So they talk about it in detail about how you can't, it's irrelevant, you know. And then here's the crazy thing, and the churches also have to understand this, is they say the rabbis' report, which is opinions about Judaism and their view of homosexuality, is irrelevant, because this case is about whether or not Jonah's statements or activities are consistent with Jewish, is not about whether Jonah's statements are about Jewish law, but them misrepresenting their efforts, right? So they're like, it doesn't matter, but it does matter, because the whole point of Jonah is saying that if you align your beliefs and you go back to your beliefs and your underlying values, that could contribute to a sexual orientation change effort. I look at men as created by God and image bearers of his image. And to sodomize that man is to dehumanize him, to rob him of his dignity, to do something that is shameful. Those are religious beliefs that the APA has no business dismissing, nor the courts, because that belief was contributing to my orientation change. I no longer desire to hurt a man in that way. And so they're saying this has nothing to do with it, but it does, because it comes to the end. Jonah was making a claim that people can change. And this is one of the means by which you can change, by aligning your behaviors and your thoughts and your beliefs with your faith. And that's part of the reason why you went to therapy in the first place, is I have these beliefs. I believe in the Noahide covenant. I believe that God created male and female. I want my gender to align and my behaviors to align to what I believe. What they don't want, and Andrew, you could probably speak to this, is they don't want people asserting their ideal self, that God is a higher standard for us. They don't want that asserted or to come forward in the culture. And when you look at the genderbread person or the unicorn, they have all these mechanisms of where are you on this spectrum, but that's the Klein tool, but it's been emasculated where it doesn't include the ideal self. Do you know what the Klein tool is? I'll bring it up another time. I'll put that in the show notes. It's a psychological term that says, where are you on these spectrums and where do you want to go? What they don't want somebody to know is that there's something greater to adhere to desire.
It's all idolization of self.
It's idolization.
I create my own identity.
Yep.
So.
All right. So A6. Now this is a clincher. The overwhelming weight of scientific authority concludes that homosexuality is not a disorder. The universal acceptance of that scientific conclusion, save for outliers such as Jonah, requires that expert opinions to the contrary must be barred. So you're an outlier if you believe that change is possible, and the courts cannot allow those others to have testimony because they're not the experts. And so Jonah doesn't get their time in front of the courts to have, which is a Noahide law about having two testifiers, multiple testifiers, that you're not judged by one testimony, you know? And so they ignored Rule 104, and they admit, well, Rule 104 says that the court should assess whether the expert's opinion is based on scientific. But what the court did was they didn't follow their own rules where the court would decide it, because the plaintiff said, but you don't need to do that here, because all the heavy lifting has been done by the APA and all the medical associations. So the court, you can just dismiss your requirement to judge for yourself. And so it says in New Jersey, the reliability of scientific technique can be proven in most cases by showing its general acceptance in a particular field. So go ahead, ignore Rule 104. We already proven that the APA has decided this for you.
Totally ignoring how biased the APA is.
Yeah. And so to me, what it is that the DSM is the law. Pretty much, because the court is saying, okay, yeah, we'll just accept the DSM is the law. So whatever the psychologists decide, that is the law of the land.
The problem with the DSM is that it was really a political document at the time when it was done. There are several books on the subject of what occurred at the basic DSM, at the APA meeting of the Psychiatric Association, and how they were led into making a political decision. Actually, the former president of the APA, Dr. Cummings, has 2 or 3 books on the subject. There was this fantastic book, which I can't remember the author's name right now, who did it as his doctoral thesis in Princeton University, in which he went through in detail how it was really all a political decision and had nothing to do with scientific validity.
And that's a great segue into the statement that in the lawsuit, further, Jonah incorrectly characterizes the court's role in assessing scientific reliability, in pointing out Rule 104. The plaintiffs are saying, no, Jonah is wrong. It argues that the APA's decision to remove homosexuality as a disorder was a politically motivated decision made to destigmatize homosexuality and was not based on science, which is what my argument is as well. That I agree with Jonah's argument. However, they're saying a trial court should not substitute its judgment for that of the relevant scientific community. So the scientific community has done 104 for the law. You don't need to explore it yourself. You don't need to weigh it out. So it's tyranny. It's literally tyranny from the DSM, from the APA. You don't have to listen to the law. The law just has to agree with the DSM. And so Jonah can hardly argue that all of these organizations, so they listed out all the, and we hear this today, all the organizations agree with us, including the Federal Appellate Court, where the victims were manipulated by the gay lobbying groups. That's exactly what it is. It's not up to the court to decide that question. Because remember, we're just focusing on what he did. But they're taking away the dialogue and the discussion about what they're claiming the lawsuit is, and saying we're the only ones that you must go our way. You must go gay in this court order. I mean, that's their argument. And that's how the court did it. So here's the crazy part, Arthur. Flat Earth. This is where Arthur was going before.
Yeah, this is absolutely nuts. I mean, this is language from the judge. He says the theory that homosexuality is a disorder is not novel, but like the notion that the earth is flat and the sun revolves around it is instead outdated and refuted. Give me a break. If that's true, all the work that Andrew does and all the work that numerous psychologists, psychiatrists, licensed coaches, etc., all the work they do is invalid. And there's hundreds and hundreds of people who do this. How the judge could compare the fact that anyone who believes that homosexuality is reparable, we use the reparative therapy term, or it can be changed, is like the notion is that the earth is flat and the sun revolves around it. Ludicrous, absolutely ludicrous.
And that's where at the onset of this podcast, I was saying we're treated as conspiracy theorists, just like flat Earth. That if we say that you can change, you're also a conspiracy theorist because you believe like the Earth is flat, that homosexuals can change. The scientific fact has been settled, and this is
you
what
two guys on the screen are proof of the fact that change is possible.
Well, Andrew never experienced.
I'm sorry. I apologize.
Yeah, no, he's.
I've experienced change in many other ways in my life, so I'll still take that. You know, that's the basic principle of psychotherapy, is that we believe people can change. Now, at least that's a traditional way of understanding it. There's more social justice oriented psychotherapy approaches that don't believe people can change, but rather think that society needs to change.
Yes.
And so that's growing more popular, like feminist psychotherapy is basically, that's the premise. No, it's not the client who has any changes to make. Society needs to change. But traditionally, why would you go into the field of therapy if you didn't believe people could change at a characterological level? And that's essentially how I view people who have a difficulty with same-sex attraction. So there's a characterological issue that needs to be addressed. And the same-sex attraction is just a fruit of that. So we work on the characterological issues. And yeah, it might not be easy therapy, but it is actual change that can happen through a therapeutic relationship with professional and ethical approaches.
And it's also important to note, which I should have said on the onset, is that the therapists aren't out there to try to change people. The client owns the goal. The therapist is just journeying with them. And so,
yeah, I'm in agreement with their goals. I'm not working at cross purposes, and I've never had to convince anyone to work on an issue they're coming in to see me for. I don't convince people. I don't coerce them.
When they put money on the table, they want something. they want to accomplish their goal, and they're paying you as a professional to come alongside of them and help guide them.
If anything, oftentimes I temper their expectations. They're like, okay, let me just, let's lower our expectations of what you think will happen in, say, so many months. And so I actually try to give them more realistic expectations regarding the change that they will see as an outcome.
All right. Thank you. And so my argument is, yes, the DSM is absolutely political. And now here's the crazy thing, guys, is they're coming out and they're admitting that it was gay activism that changed it and not science. They're literally admitting it. I just shared yesterday, and I'll get this as a podcast note, the Behavioral and Cognitive Therapy Group, which is their own type of psychology group. They're against conversion therapy and all that. But they just came out with an article saying, yeah, it was gay activism that we changed. And it was a moral change. They said it right in the paper that the president had a moral change of heart towards the gay issue. And so all the science follows. And here with this 81 words, you can Google this, the American Life, 81 words. It's the granddaughter of the president of the APA who worked on changing the DSM. And she talks about how there was a gay cabal that was working to change it. And it was voted on. It wasn't, the science didn't change. It was a moral argument. It was activism that changed the DSM.
Taking that one step further, Dr. Spitzer, who was one of the major architects of that change that you're talking about, Darren, subsequently, many years later, did a study and said, come to think of it, people really can change, but I was really trying to do it for a moral reason. And then the gay activists all descended upon the poor guy and said, "Oh my God, you're getting too old, you're losing it," etc.
Yeah, the Spitzer report showed that change was possible. And he's like, well, everybody says that change isn't possible, but yet I see a community that says it is. And so he went and did good scientific research. And then the LGBT kept lambasting him because he was supposed to be on their side. And in his old age, he quote unquote recanted and apologized. And so they'll say, oh, well, he recanted his work. Well, you can't recant science.
He correction. He never recanted the work. He simply said he agreed that it was a political decision. He basically He never recanted the subsequent piece of paper in article in which he said that change is possible.
Yeah, it's more like he regretted doing the research,
Yeah,
or how it hurt his base, basically.
Right.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It wasn't that he recanted it, but they're saying that he repented of it, having it.
Yeah, he didn't retract the study. He couldn't, because there's no scientific basis for retracting it.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm saying the DSM is political, and here's the other thing: is in 2007, the APA adopts a policy opposing intelligent design. They reject the creator. Okay, and that comes out at the end of 2008. By 2009, they come out with what they agree is the approach to sexual orientation change effort. And they say, oh, well, we can't tell if it's effective, if it's harmful, if it works. We don't really know if homosexuality is biological, and we looked at all the evidence, and it's really not clear, but there's anecdotal evidence of harm. And that's what everybody jumps on, is anecdotal evidence of harm. But there's also anecdotal evidence that change is possible, because when I was gay identified, I read that, and it said that for religiously motivated people, there are evidence that change is possible. I'm like, well, good enough for me. I love Jesus, and so you reject God, you reject intelligent design, you're left with studying people as they are, and people are going to change over time. So that's where you get polygamy. And as people are turned over to the debasement of their bodies and their minds and become more reprobate, then yeah, monogamy is going to have no purpose. What was the purpose of that? We have polygamy. There's enough of love to go around. And as we start falling into this pit, then all the APA is doing is studying mankind on the spectrum of where they're at. There's no normal with the APA. There's no design for our bodies. There's no normal for our minds. Remember, they said it's all stigma. And if there's no what's the word I'm looking for? If there's no distress, then homosexuality is normal. In the DSM-3, they had this thing called ego-dystonic homosexuality. Yeah, they removed homosexuality as a disorder, but at least they threw the ex-gay community a bone, or the people that said, you know what, this isn't for me. Even Kinsey's sidekick tried homosexuality and then left it because he's like, it's not for me. That was ego-dystonic. It means your ego's one way, but you're acting another way. And so DSM-3, they at least threw us a bone, but the LGBT lobby made it political, and yeah. So here's the distress part: is that they said that it's distress. They said, well, look, we want to take it out completely, because even those ego-dystonic people are being abused. That's just internalized homophobia. It's religious stigma. It's external stigma. So it's those Christians or those Jews telling you that God didn't create you that way. That's why you have distress. And so if we get rid of that, then you're not going to be distressed. You're going to live peacefully. That's where they're at here. So to me, and what I want to conclude here, and we're going to wrap it up here in a minute, is that the takeaway from their arguments of dismissing all this is that the science is settled. Anybody that disagrees or wants to pursue studies outside of the official recognized state opinion, which is the APA, they're denied access to truth claims. Their research is invalid, their testimonies are invalid, and any evidence to their decided research, their truth, is considered proffering opinions and is not admissible in court. So we will never get our day in court. They'll dismiss the rabbis, that any alignment to your faith actually experience change, that alignment, talking through therapy, and just exploring sexual orientation and your romantic and sexual, like that, you can't even explore that because the science is settled. That's the takeaway, is that it's pre-drawn conclusion. You have to go gay. End of story. You must go gay. And that's what this bully pulpit of using the courts and destroying Jonah has done. And we'll do a part 2 to talk about where we went after what happened after Jonah and in the next case, because they doubled down in the injustice that was given to Jonah. So any closing remarks? Andrew,
no, this just reiterates what I was saying before, that they are treating a philosophical assertion as a scientific fact, when science cannot prove an assertion of just if something is a good and normal variation of human sexuality. That's not within the realm of science. You can get science that may support it based on your view of epistemology or of ethics, maybe if you use a consequentialist approach. But guess what? There's nothing but negative consequences if the whole society were engaged exclusively in homosexual behavior. So even just a godless, consequentialist, utilitarian ethics system will come up very short if you use that as your basis for if something is good or not. So on what basis are they saying that this is normal and good? It's really just their assertion. And if we tack on the word scientific in front of it, then we can keep it protected because we treat science as our God. It's like the idol we worship in society now. And we can get away with marginalizing people's religious and other views.
And Arthur, any closing thoughts?
No, I think you've handled it pretty well, actually. I mean, I just like to say that the fact that you cannot change philosophy has so permeated the culture that we're really in a very, very difficult position. But I am optimistic, frankly, that maybe the courts, given some recent case law on whether it be the overturning of Roe or other stuff, the school case up in Maine, that perhaps the whole idea of allowing people to follow religious dictates has an opportunity to gain more, the word I'm looking for, not credibility, it's sort of more visibility, more definitiveness within our culture.
Amen. Well, thank you both for being on the Voice of the Voiceless podcast and carrying this really heavy burden of the truth. And I pray that God will give us victory. I know that God will be victorious in the end, and that the lie of conversion therapy and denying the possibility of change for individuals who are seeking it will come to an end. And I think the LGBT lobby knows that it's unconstitutional, what they're doing with these conversion therapy bans. And I just hope that our Constitution holds up as well. So, all right, God bless, and hope to talk to you for part 2.
Voice of the Voiceless is a nonprofit organization whose mission is to amplify the voices of ex-LGBT and help seekers in reconciling faith, behaviors, and identity. Voice of the Voiceless defends the rights of former homosexuals, individuals with unwanted same-sex attraction, and their families. Voice of the Voiceless also supports the faith-based community and works actively in the United States to defend the constitutional, inalienable rights of all Americans to share their views of faith and homosexuality in the public forum. Voice of the Voiceless supports similar international efforts and provides assistance whenever possible to individuals and organizations abroad who align with our mission and goals. Be sure to visit our website at www.voiceofthevoiceless.info. Your financial support is also needed and very much appreciated. Access our financial support portal online at www.voiceofthevoiceless.info/donate. Also, follow us on Facebook at www.facebook.com/EXLGBT rights. Finally, be sure to sign up for our newsletter on our website so you can get the latest updates. God bless, and we look forward to seeing you soon.